So I recorded earlier, and apparently my mic, I forgot to supply it phantom power, so there's probably no way you would have heard what I was saying, so I deleted the video, and I'm doing it all over again. Hold on one second while I close this window. Okay, so here I am again doing this video and talking about what I spoke about earlier. Okay, so far up to now, we were talking about making this game um, from the ground up based on a logistics idea that was also um, based a little bit on, demolition work with. Let me make sure I'm live. Yeah, I am live. It's streaming. Demolition work with um, logistics, taking basically refuge, rubbish from a roof or demolition work to a landfill, and the logistics that's required on that, and then different companies, and this other part of the world that you don't really see if you're not paying attention. The other thing was to do a two-part game where the first part would be setting up the actions, and the second part would be executing the actions, similar to the cost in that regard. Um, if you haven't played the cost, you have a round of doing the actions and a second round where they actually execute. Excuse me. So I was thinking about this game today and thinking about what am I doing, and if it wasn't for me really thinking about it, this would only be an exercise in brainstorming and in going live and talking about it. But if I'm starting to really dig some of these ideas, even though I haven't played them, and for this game to have any chance at all to be something that I want to continue working on, I've got to make it deeper in the sense of the human experience, because I am personally trying to explore the human experience, because that's the interesting thing you can do with board games. So let me explore that really quick before I start going into some of these new mechanisms. So for me, it's easy to come up with mechanisms in a board game. Mechanisms early on, I believed, were difficult, and that was the heart and soul of a game, because when I played a game, that's what I saw was the mechanisms. I was disregarding the theme and the intention of the game. Sometimes there was nothing really to see, but sometimes there was a lot to see, and I was ignoring it for the win, I guess you could say. Or my incentive is to win, so my incentive in playing board games is not to see what the designer is trying to say or do. My incentive is to win, so I am not going to pay attention to the nuances that make this particularly special, and why this particular game, whatever game it is, can't be about a different theme. Now, not all games can say that, but the really special games can. So when I work on a game now, I said before, I thought mechanisms were the key part. I realize as designing games that mechanisms were actually one of the easier parts, if not the easiest part. So now that I realize, for me, mechanisms are easy, the question is, well, one, how do you challenge yourself and make mechanisms that are meaningful? And I think the trick is to not look at them as mechanisms, look at the experience. How do you make the experience? What experience are you trying to convey to your audience, and how is it like, why do you want it to be meaningful? What does it mean to you? Um, what are you trying to say that necessarily you can't say writing something down? Um, I mean, a lot of people are much more skilled at writing stuff down, so they could probably express their feelings or express um, whatever they're trying to say by just writing it down. What I can't, and the stuff that I want to say is maybe more complex than I have the vocabulary to express. And for me, board games is the ideal way to do that. Uh, Before this, I've been different types of. I was a musician, and I was when I went to school. I thought I was doing the whole fine art thing. Um, I know how to draw and paint and everything, and I became a graphic designer to basically fund me being a musician, and the musician part never panned out. But anyway, the important part here is art means a lot to me, and I see board games as art. And for me, it's not interesting to exercise your technique. The important part for me is to use your technique to express yourself or to communicate, basically to communicate whatever you're going to communicate. Maybe it's about yourself, maybe it's not, whatever. So the important part about the board game is that's the art. That is what makes it. That's the difference between being a technician and an artist to me, is to expressing those feelings. So here I was doing this brainstorm only as a technician. I didn't interrogate my work. I didn't look at what does this mean? What's the importance of it? Why am I working on this thing? What am I trying to say? I'm not saying all board games are like that, or not even very few are like that. But for me, that's what's going to differentiate me from other designers, is always from here on out, not right now, but from the moment that I came up with this idea, is if this is art and this is the medium, instead of waiting until I had more time to do painting to express this, I can use my hobby, which is board games, and designing is something I feel compelled to do. I could do that and do the art at the same time. I can make this my art, and my art is to express some things that I've thought about and some things I'm trying to explore about the human experience. And particularly in board games, I think it's important to I don't have a better word than, let's say, I was going to say whitewash, but that's not really the right word. I don't want to make the experience of a board game dull or numb from the society that it exists in, if you're designing something from like a historical perspective. In other words, if we look at Arkwright as a beautiful, wonderful board game, love it. But beyond the scope of that game is, where did the cotton come from making the textiles? When we start looking at the Industrial Revolution, we start looking at why is it possible? When we talk about raw goods being turned into manufactured goods, from raw to refined goods, the raw goods, the input of this system is human labor. And if we don't have the human labor part of, like, the Arkwright of games, we're kind of neglecting that part of history. And that's okay, because it's beyond that scope. But to me, if I were to make an Arkwright, it would have to have that. And even though it would be a less popular game, it would be a game that I would be happy to make, because it shows the human experience. It can also show some nuances that people haven't thought about with the situation. of human labor and how we went from a society that didn't look at the world through hourly wage to convert into that world of hourly wage, or to look at slavery and everything that goes along with the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. I'm not saying one it happened because of the Industrial Revolution, like slavery didn't happen because of the Industrial Revolution, but without slavery, we can definitely say that the Industrial Revolution would look very different. So, um, when we're looking at this game, there's nuances in the situation that I hadn't addressed, and when I interrogate my work, I'm like, this is just making a game without thinking about the consequences of what's happening, or not thinking about the human experience, just making a logistics game. And ultimately, no matter how good or bad this game would be, it would be just an exercise in showing that, hey, I can flex my coming up with mechanism muscles, which for me, and I think most designers would say, is the easiest muscle to flex. So to interrogate this work, I keep saying interrogate this work, to look at this work and to make it meaningful for me, I need to do something with the human experience that's a little deeper. And what I came up with, and I recorded earlier, but it's totally gone, um, is the idea of the workforce. So when you look at this problem in particular, you can look at there's companies who are doing the logistical work of taking refuse. They're taking something from the job site, which let's call it rubbish. They're taking rubbish from the job site, stuff that demolition work. They're taking that from the job site and they're taking it away, so that the workers that are working on the job site can continue working. And this is a system where you have people on the ground that are actually doing the work. They are one demolishing the building, and we're not talking about the big crane that comes and uses a demolition ball and just starts wrecking into the building. We're talking about the individuals on the ground that are picking these pieces up and putting it in waste bins, or people that are having to learn to use heavy equipment to bulldoze and to front end loaders and everything to get this waste into a rollout bin or whatever, to get it taken away from the job site so they can rebuild it or whatever, re-roof it, whatever they need to do. So all those workers are the key to this system. Not the fun part of the system. Actually, that's the fun part of the system. But they are part of the system. The fun part of the system is the other stuff. Like in this game, we want to make the fun part of the system is controlling the companies and taking the rubbish to the landfill, to do all this logistical part of it, and to block other people and to stop them from being able to do those top level things. And I think in board game design, it's real easy to look at the top down, to look at, okay, so owning a company does all these things, don't worry about any of the little stuff. But I want this work to be meaningful for me. So for me, what I'm going to do, and what I thought about, is we'll have, this is the job, this is, let me move this over. How? We'll have a block. Okay, and this block, I could do it from here. Okay, so this block, when it generates rubbish, there's these two places. We'll say those two places already have the workforce to do it. The problem is A, B, C, and D need workforce. So whenever there's a cube here, that shows that there's workforce in A. So if there's workforce in A, when this tile needs to generate rubbish, it'll produce an A as well as the empty spaces. Okay? We're also going to say that for a vehicle to leave the job site or the block, it must have a cube corresponding to the color. So if this was the case, we would know that A, B, and C, these two spaces in C generated rubbish because he had a cube here. But if somebody played the leave card, A could not leave or something. We'll figure that out. But as far as right now, A could not leave because they're contracted to be there. They're there. They are there waiting for the rubbish, but it hadn't been delivered because there's no workforce to do the job. So maybe on the cards we'll have the way to manipulate these workers, basically to move them in the correct positions, to put them in the right places, and then we'll also deal with the costs of doing that, the costs of workers. Because the other thing that I hadn't really talked about is generalized labor versus skilled labor. Skilled labor is, if you look at if you look at these jobs, right? Generally, like let's say the work gets done, meaning there's demolition work, and then they need to find, before they do the demolition work, they'll need to find a company that will haul it off first. If it's and we're talking about the demolition part. On the demolition part, if it is a place that, let's say it's a school, they'll have a school board, and they'll have people who will have to decide who to give the job to, and generally they'll put it out for bid, and whoever bids the least, they'll get it. Okay, the people that suffer from that kind of job environment is the general workforce. If you have a surplus in a workforce that allow you to drop the wages, the lowest wages will allow you to do the job quickly, because more hands on deck means you'll do it faster, and the cheaper that it is to get workers, because workers are not in demand, they are in surplus, drops the price of these demolitions, which means that it goes to the cheapest worker, which means they make very little. Skilled work works a little bit differently. It just depends, but usually skilled work is not. There's not a surplus. There's a deficit in skilled work. So in skilled work, the bargaining chips are within the hands of the workers that are skilled, unless it really depends, But in general, the higher pay, they'll have a better opportunity not to get underbid and to make a living at, because it's skilled labor, it's harder to come by. They can raise the price of their work. So when we're looking at this game and how it relates to that, all this movement, movement of rubbish and whatnot is generalized labor. It is unskilled. It's easy to learn. It does require a little bit of muscle, and for that reason, these cubes are going to be easy to come by, and you still have to come by them. I'll figure out what the upkeep cost is going to be later. but I think also the movement and all that will be part of the cards that you draft at the beginning. They'll allow you to also move these as well. Because I already recorded this once, I don't know what I didn't mention or what I should say or didn't say or whatever. Hopefully, this is enough information to talk about the next part of the game, which would be the adding of the labor. Um, I do want to say that the reason why these things are being recorded is so that I can go back and have a record of how this developed, and also I can look at people that, like I brought in Lyndon at very early, and point out what they've done, because usually, because I come up with a lot of ideas, they assume that all the ideas were mine, and that's not necessarily true. People that are involved come up with ideas, and I'd like to have a recorded record of where it was at, and I can say, hey, look, this is when you came up with that one idea. I ended up using it in this game. Anyway, also, since I'm very forgetful and I come up with a lot of stuff every day, just wandering around through the day-to-day job and everything, new ideas come to me and I try to remember them, and I come back and I just spew them out. And I guess today I listened to a podcast, and then it reminded me of why I want to personally do board games, and that is to explore the human experience. The podcast wasn't about that. The podcast was about some guy who cheated and pretended to be somebody he wasn't, and he ended up getting some work published. But it really got me to think about the nuance of his situation, and it's easy to judge him for portraying somebody he wasn't. But if we made a board game that showed him and his incentives and let players play those things, and added just weird nuances, you would see that things aren't as black and white as you think. So, the cost, we try to do that with not making it so heavy-handed in the killing of workers, and show where a company might come up with, the bottom line, and how the incentive of the business at first seems like it only makes sense to kill workers. So if you haven't played the cost now, you have no idea what I'm talking about. But for me, this game will explore the game that I'm working on right now. I don't know how much further it'll go. I don't know if it'll actually become a game. I don't know if it'll just quit. I might not even design on it anymore from today forward. But right now, for me, it will explore the worker demand versus, skilled labor versus unskilled labor somehow. I've got the unskilled labor part first. I don't have the skilled labor part. Maybe it won't have it. Maybe it'll just explore, these workers and and their essential role in this system. Maybe that'll be the intention. This is just free off the cuff, but maybe, there'll be two versions of the game. Within, you would get both versions, and one version would just be, here is what the game is like when you don't consider the workers, the generalized workers who have to do this work, and here's the version of the game where those cubes are in. It's a little bit more complex, and definitely, hopefully, come up with a way to make people think about this. We'll see. We're a long way from that. Right now, we're just mechanisms and mechanisms and mechanisms. And hopefully my TTS will start working soon, so that we can actually start implementing this into a board and actually playing some stuff and trying some crazy stuff, so that we can at some point show Lyndon and play through it and have him destroy the game and tell me how it doesn't work, so that we can make something that works. Anyway, hopefully it wasn't too long-winded. Hopefully I remembered to say everything that I was going to say about the design. I don't know. But the main thing to come across is that I'm going to try to add another element to this game that has to do with feeling. Feeling's much more harder to convey, so wish me luck. Anyway, follow me, subscribe, like me, whatever it takes. Just do something. All right, bye.